We're live.
We're live.
Wide web.
So I guess now we probably need to invite some people in and maybe let them know in the groups that we're now live, just to remind
I have a screen that says we are now live. Hello, World Wide Web.
Okay. Oh, hang on. I'm
the link.
Clicking the link button, but I guess you've all got it. Okay.
I've got the link button.
I'll put it in chat.
Tim is just on Skype with me. He's having some trouble getting in, but we'll get him in shortly.
Okay.
Yeah, I suggest we just continue.
I agree. I think that's the way to go. So I guess we've currently got no viewers, but we should probably start the general conversation about driving in the Philippines and what to worry about. Now, James, you said that you were to head this one up, so why don't you get going?
Yeah, okay. Driving in the Philippines, it's something that...
Okay, that worked. We lost you there, James.
This part of the Philippines, isn't
it? I'll just stop you there, James, and tell everyone who's watching this that we'll cover the internet connections in the Philippines in a later episode.
Correct.
When they come here, gives them a big sense of independence and free, something you can you hear me now?
Not really. You're walking backwards through molasses. In fact, did you just get
hello.
Florida driving a Mitsubishi Lancer? Because it sounds like he might have sort of hit the page.
Okay. Try again right now. Nothing?
No, nothing. All right. Well, how about you and I start, Chris, and then we can look at. We're having some technical difficulties with the lineup.
Driving in a far gives out drive.
It's real bad. It's real bad, dude.
Okay. I'll have to. I think I have to mute it.
Okay, I'm just trying to help Tim sort out his technical difficulties. Do you want to kick off, Chris, with a bit of a monologue or something like that? Because this is obviously going on YouTube, so go for it.
Okay, fine. All right, you're going to help him set it out. Okay.
Yep, that's my plan.
Okay, well let's start with where people actually commence, and that is when they arrive. As soon as they've arrived in the Philippines, they've got apparently the right to drive on their own license for a period of 90 days, I believe. Now, I wanted to verify that, but I'm not going to get any feedback, I guess. So the point being that you can drive for 90 days, after which, if you're pulled over, you're in violation.
You're technically unlicensed in that case, aren't you, Chris? Basically, as far as insurance and everything else goes.
Well, that's a good point, because I was just about to state that what people have done and tend to do is drive around for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 months. And they can always just remember to say if they're pulled up, oh yeah, I only arrived 2 months ago. Now they're going to avoid the problem in the here and now. But if they are involved in an accident in the future, and it is established that they have been here for a period of time and are driving without a Philippine license, that is just going to compound their problems. So that's a good point to make, and that's a good starting point to make. So if you are going to stay in the Philippines and want to continue to drive, beyond that 3-month period, you really need to apply for a license. And how are we going across there? Can I pass it to you?
Yeah, okay. I guess the big thing for me is that if I was coming out here and I was going to stay here for an extended period of time, I'd be inclined to go for that license, like week 1, just get it done. My mother recently came out. She stayed for about 3 months. We bought the car while she was here. She was thinking she was going to drive it, so we got a license exchange pretty much within a couple of weeks of her. James,
I'm back, guys.
welcome back.
Sorry about that.
Okay,
No problem.
James, we're at a point where we're just discussing, we've already talked about the period that you can stay in the Philippines and drive on your license from back home, which I believe is 90 days or 3 months, thereabouts. Yep. And then we talked about the risk of, it's very easy to get away with it. You're pulled over by a policeman or something and you continue to say for the next 6, 8, 10, 12 extended months that you've only got here 2 months ago. But if you, in the future, if you're suddenly in an accident and something is a serious matter, and of course, being a foreigner, you're the one they're going to look at to fund the accident, irrespective of who's at fault. And that's
absolutely.
So they would be scrutinising that, and it would just compound your problems if you were later found to have driven without a Philippine licence. So yes, easy to get away with, but not the smartest thing to do.
You guys have all got Filipino driving licenses now, I assume?
I don't because I don't drive, but I guess you probably do, Chris.
Chris,
Yeah,
you've got a Filipino driving license, yeah?
Who are you asking?
You, Chris.
You, Chris.
Ah, yes. I'm actually on my second. I can go on air, and I wonder whether this could have any repercussions, but I originally got my driver's license in Cebu, and I didn't have any assistance, and I just queued up all day, basically, for this or that, and it was just about a full waste of a day. At the end of the day, I got a piece of paper, and I had to carry that around for 3-4 months, and then I finally got a license, and then when I got it, my surname was not spelt correctly. So that just was not worth trying to fix or change.
Getting stuff fixed and changed in the LTO here is a nightmare.
Correct. So what I actually did is, well, here's a funny little story. Jumping ahead, I was driving in Angeles City in the main sort of strip there, and I was pulled up. I was pulled up and charged for not having a seatbelt. Now, anyone who actually knows that area and has lived there, that there's areas where they do pull you up, certainly inside the base, absolutely, but not there on the strip. It just never happens. And here's an interesting part. He issued me a ticket, and
which is pretty rare in itself.
When I looked at the ticket, it was in the next next city. I don't know, 50 kilometres away or something, or more. It was in an entirely different city. But here's how it works. You just say you've got a fine, whether it's 1,000 pesos or whatever it is, you take it up to the LTO office to pay it, and they're going to look at it and say, we can't accept that here. You've got to pay it at the specified branch.
That's right, yeah.
So this expletive from the LTO was just happened to be in Pampanga, way out of his area, and maybe he had a thing. I'm just going to get a whole lot of foreigners today. I hate foreigners. Who knows? I'm speculating entirely there, but for whatever motivation, he was working way outside his area in a totally different city. So there's a little story.
I had a similar incident when I tried to get my license.
We're starting to get some viewers in the page. I'd just like to welcome a young lady called Tony Gavin to the fray. It appears that he's watching this conversation. So just a big shout out to Tony up there in Brisbane. Aussie, 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 mate.
Oi, oi, oi.
All right, carry on, James.
I was going to say, I had a similar incident when I tried to get my license, as Chris, described earlier. I went there with my UK driving license. I filled out all the forms in Batangas, so it wasn't even in like the deep depths of the province. I filled out all the forms, I posted them in, I sat there, and I watched as probably 10, 20, 30 Filipinos came and went and left with licenses. And come about 5 o'clock, I was still sat there. And I said to the girl behind the counter, I said, "Miss, is there a problem with my application?" And she looked back at me and said, "Yeah, sir, you're a foreigner. I have no idea how to process it." This was at like 9. I'd submitted this at 9 a.m., okay? 5 p.m., she tells me, "Sir, I have no idea how to process it. Can you come back tomorrow?" So that's what I did. I came back the next morning with the same paperwork and saw the same girl. And luckily, she managed to get hold of like the guy in charge, or whatever it was, and my license was issued within literally 2 hours. I had to do the rudimentary medical test, although I didn't have to do any other kind of test. Didn't have to do any practical test or theory test, anything like that. Just the very basic medical test, like the drugs test, for example, which proves that you're not on drugs that day, which is totally pointless. And that was it. I left with my license. And I've now renewed it twice, although the last time I renewed it was 2 months ago. I don't know if you guys know, but the LTO in the Philippines have 0 plastic license cards available. There are none in the country, apparently. So all I have is an official receipt and my old ID, which is apparently valid for use with my official receipt. My official receipt says it's good until 2019. I asked the girl in the LTO, I said, "Miss, how long do you think it'll be before you have any plastic licenses?" She said, "Sir, I wouldn't basically," she told me in Tagalog, that I shouldn't hold out too much hope that we get any before 2019, before your bit of paper expires, which filled me with a huge amount of confidence. So that's what I'm driving around with.
What was the date on this? The date? The date you applied?
Sorry, Chris?
Just the date you applied.
I applied. I applied 2 months ago. It was just a renewal. I already had a Filipino license, so it was just a renewal. So I paid the 400 pesos, what it is to renew, and I've got an official receipt, but they don't actually have any ID cards available. But my official receipt has stamped on it that it's good as a temporary ID, valid license, until 2019. So it's good for 3 years. And I was told not to hold my breath if I would get a plastic piece of ID before that time. So we'll see. I've actually been stopped. I was actually stopped here in our municipality a couple of weeks ago by a rather new policeman who didn't know who I was. Usually I don't get hacked that often here because I know most of the police guys here, but there was a new guy who stopped me, and I showed him my official receipt with the stamp on it, and he didn't seem to have a problem with it. So it does seem as though it's good for use.
Yeah. They've got a very similar problem with issuing license plates for new registrations, but let's not jump ahead there, but it's the same thing.
Yeah, I know, Chris. I'm waiting for mine still from last year.
I'll just jump in briefly and say that a couple more viewers have come on and started watching. Thanks for coming in, guys.
Tim, is Tim there? Tim, are you there, Tim?
Yes, I cannot get my video going. I'm sorry.
That's all right, Tim. That's all right. Tim, have you got any driving anecdotes about the Philippines, or anything you want to say about driving in the Philippines?
Well, other than it can be interesting, I think most people that come to the Philippines try to use Western mentality in many aspects of living in the Philippines.
Yep.
And driving can be the same way, because what seems right or wrong, unfortunately, is not right or wrong in the Philippines. But I've had some similar situations where when I originally arrived in the Philippines, which would have been about 10.5 years ago, I had a military friend already kind of in my pocket in Davao, and he took me to the LTO, and I basically bypassed every queue and every line there was, and it still took about 3 hours, but eventually they just, well, then they seemed to have enough plastic then, so they, you know, they sent it out the window. A real license, like you say, I did a drug test and everything else, and I already had a motorcycle. What do they call that? An add-on thing, and they of course gave me that because I've been driving motorcycle all my life. But I've really had no problems. I've had a few mishaps in the process, which turned out to be quite interesting. But really, it's kind of whoever has the loudest horn and the brightest headlights.
Hey, and that's the thing. That's the thing, Tim.
With the issuing, or what they say, converting a license, when I first arrived there and got my license converted, in Australia, where I come from, we have a motorcycle license. We have well, not a separate license, but it's endorsed. It's a separate endorsement that you actually have to apply for. I'd never driven a motorcycle in my life, and when they gave me the new license, it's automatically for motorcycles also.
That's interesting.
That's an interesting thing, and I actually then bought a motorbike and learned to drive it. That's another story.
I think just going back to what Tim was saying about who's got the loudest horn and the brightest lights, and that's absolutely the biggest difference for me about driving here. You drive a car, a motorbike, anything in the UK, if someone beeps their horn at you, you want to punch them in the face. It's like a big deal, especially in London. People are impatient. If someone's beeping their horn, that's an aggressive thing to do. Whereas in the Philippines, I use my horn all the time, every time I'm riding my motorbike, all day long, just to basically let people know that I'm there.
Okay, well, in Australia, we've actually got very strong laws that you're not allowed to blow your horn, so to speak, for any other reason than an actual emergency. And it's seriously enforced, and you can go around and day after day after day, you'll never hear one horn blown in the streets. Very rare here in Australia. Now, one of the problems in the Philippines, I'll just throw in something interesting, is when the manufacturers produce vehicles, they have a range of sort of horns, and a little sort of mini minor sort of cars going and a sort of trucks. Well, one of the confusing things in the Philippines, which you're all immediately picking up on, is the Filipinos love to mix them up. And end up having car horns on trikes or something, and you're looking around for a certain sort of vehicle. It's just one of those little things to be aware of.
You hear an air horn behind you and a Vespa comes up in your wing mirror. Yep.
That's right. I've traveled heavily in Mindanao, and that was a big problem. Sometimes you would be driving, and all of a sudden, there's 10 other motorcycles behind you. Somebody has one of those massive horns. You make a stupid reaction and almost run them over because you think you're actually moving to the right or trying to get out of the way of a truck, when in fact you're trying to find the truck. It's not there. It's the motorcycle doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Go on. Can I just share an anecdote?
Yeah.
When I first moved to Cambodia, which was 2008, I got some advice from a long-term local, and he was actually a Malaysian Chinese guy who was expat in Siem Reap, and he said to me, you know, Damon, where you're from and where I'm from, there are road rules, and you drive on the left or you drive on the right. You know, out here, you aim for the middle and the biggest car wins. And he was absolutely right. And I think it probably applies here a lot of the time too, to be honest.
Yep.
Yeah, and the other thing here is the whole flashing of the headlights. Like in the UK, for example, I don't know about New Zealand or the US or Australia, but in the UK, for example, if there's a situation where only one car can fit, if somebody flashes their headlights, that's kind of you giving way, and the other guy saying, "Come on, you can come through. I'm flashing my headlights. Come on through." Whereas in the Philippines, it's totally the opposite. Totally the opposite. Basically, in the Philippines, if someone flashes their headlights or puts their headlights on and leaves them on full beam, that means I'm fucking coming through. You can either get out the way or we're gonna hit each other. That's the big difference here.
Yep.
Hazard lights are another fun one. In most Western countries I've been to, you put your hazard lights on when your car's broken down and you want to pull to the side of the road and alert.
Yeah.
Here it means I'm part of a fucking convoy, and if you don't move, like, we're coming straight through you.
I'm important.
But it's the same in Malaysia, it's the same in Cambodia, it's the same, you know. The hazard lights mean just, yeah.
I spent a lot. Go ahead. I spent a lot.
If we want to stay with the structure,
go on, Tim.
Do you want to talk about the actual process of applying for a license or their experience?
Well, I told you my experience earlier was a shambles.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a good idea. Let's go around different people's experience. Next.
Okay, well, I mean, I can talk about a third party, which was my mother. She came out here. She held a full international New Zealand driver's license. We got it transferred in about 10 minutes in Baguio and had to go back 3 weeks later and pick it back up. And we paid the fees exactly as published, and there was never a problem. And she, up until now, she's got a full Philippine driver's license. What does confuse me a little bit is in other countries where I've lived, if you come from a left-hand drive country and you're transferring to a right-hand drive country, or vice versa, they'd actually expect you to go through some sort of a driving test. That's not the case here. If you've got a valid international license, they will issue you a Philippine license, even if you're not from the US and you're not used to driving on the side of the road. And I'd wrap that up by saying that my father comes out here 4 times a year. He's been riding motorbikes for 40 years. He won't ride here on the highways because he's always lived in countries that drive on the other side of the road, and he's shit scared of messing that up.
That's a huge thing for me. Obviously, in the UK, we drive on the left. Here, everyone drives on the right, and it is a big thing you have to adapt to. But after 6 years here, I've pretty much got it. I have no idea what I'd be like if I went back to the UK, though.
Yeah, I experienced the same, but it really happened whenever I've come back here. It's never much of an issue in the Philippines, really, that you have to be a little bit on the wrong side of the road. But yeah, I've sort of, which side of the road am I supposed to be on? And that's happened in reverse when you head back. So that's if you spend a lot of time in the Philippines and you come back, got the reverse problem potentially. But also it's worth noting, especially for guys who are watching who haven't actually driven here, the left side of the road, right side of the road, middle of the road, people come at you from all angles. Guys riding carabaos down the middle of the road. It's an absolute. You need to have eyes up your ass to keep track of everyone who's coming at you.
Shoulder, James. I'd just like to say that tricycles and motorbikes have got this idea in the country that it's okay to use the shoulder even if you're heading towards traffic. So overtaking, to be so careful of, and I know guys that have got themselves in some trouble and had the odd head-on collision because they just didn't expect to find a vehicle coming towards them.
Yeah, especially if they're only going a short distance. If they're only going a short distance, like from a junction to a sari store or something like that, they would just go up the wrong side of the road. They don't even consider it to be an issue.
You're just being, I don't know, strict or well, it's just dumb foreigners, I guess.
Well,
I always experience with the motorcycles when they come out from a dirt road or a side road onto a main highway. Of course, they don't stop, but if you actually look at the practice of tuk-tuks and those kind of things, which are actually multi-cabs and one motorcycle carrying 14 people, those people actually cannot stop. So what they do is I think they translated that from, well, that guy didn't stop, so why should I? And I think over a long period of time, that's what's caused a lot of that.
Yeah, I agree. And that is a huge safety thing. When guys come out of side roads onto main roads, they don't care. They just carry on. They think they're going to join the flow of traffic, even if they're not up to speed with the flow of traffic. You have to swerve around them.
Bikes and jeepneys, they will just turn onto the road without looking. There is an absolute expectation on their part, unless they hear a roaring truck's horn, I guess, that whatever it is going to give way. And that's, I've seen it so often. And here's a little one. How many people experience areas where trikes driving at night don't use their lights in order to save electricity?
Yeah.
Bicycles, bikes, jeeps, cars.
But I'll be standing outside of my house at about 2 o'clock in the morning, sort of just getting ready to toddle off to bed, having a cigarette, enjoying the air, and I'll hear a motorbike, and I'll look in both directions, and the next thing, the thing will pass me, and he's doing about 60 up a provincial road with not even a cigarette glow coming out of his mouth. You know, you don't see him until he's 2 inches from your nose. And yet, in most countries, I guess, that all of us are from, the rule is that you've got your headlight on your motorbike even during the day. And I know most foreigners adhere to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Because it's so easy to miss one, you know.
Yep.
Yeah, and actually, the brand new motorbike I just bought last year, the headlights are always on. You cannot switch them off. I know Filipinos bypass that with switches and things like that. But my headlights are always on. It's obviously a safety feature now of new bikes. Most
of those lights have got LED lights that are hanging off the motor anyway. It's not like they're saving electricity.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Maybe they think it uses more fuel.
It's very funny because if you drive into an area that they're not used to, especially in Mindanao, I'll go into like the Muslim area of Mindanao, and a lot of times when, excuse me, as you drive down the road, people will point to your headlight saying, "Sir, your headlight's on."
I get that all the time, Tim.
My purpose if you have it on because I've got about 250,000 miles on a motorcycle, and I refuse to drive without a headlight on. I don't care what time of the day it is.
Yeah, I agree.
The only time I've ever actually rode a motorbike, I nearly killed myself, so I haven't gotten back on one since. But in my defence, Your Honour, I was absolutely shit-faced at the time, and I was in the Cambodian provinces. So, you know, that's another story for another day. But the problem is, right, in Western countries, the fact that motorbikes have always got their headlights on, it's actually a safety feature for every other driver on the road too. And you've got to be prepared for the fact that you are going to possibly have a collision with someone who hasn't got their headlight on. And somehow you've got to prepare yourself for that.
Yeah, I mean, in the UK, we have an annual MOT, which basically says that your vehicle is safe to be on the roads, and that includes all the kinds of headlights, horns, seat belts, you name it, everything. I mean, even something simple like that here, I just don't know if it would ever work. Half the bikes I see don't even have provision for a light.
The Philippines is those sort of laws are in place. That guidelines, legislation, whatever's behind it, those rules and regulations are in place. It's purely a matter of enforcement.
It is a matter of enforcement, and on so many fronts in this country, not just this one. I've got to say that's as political as I'm going to get, but it has to be said that is.
It's a whole other discussion. If you actually looked up the laws that are actually should be enforced here, which aren't, then yeah, it's crazy.
It is.
I saw yesterday.
It's actually got more restrictions, and the government has more draconian power than you can imagine.
So go on, Tim. What were you going to say, Tim?
There was a very interesting bit of information came up yesterday that because of the new rule that was put through about using the LTO's bolts that they issue with your license plates, if you do not use them, there's a 5,000 peso fine for that. But someone inspected all their trucks up at somewhere in Manila. I'm not sure exactly where it was, and guess what? all the LTO's license plates are put on by sub. They went out and bought their own. They didn't use the LTO ones, so they're guilty of their own infraction.
Well, I'd heard that was the reason that there was no number plates available at the moment in the Philippines, because there was a problem with, I'm not sure if it was the bolts or the plates themselves fatiguing and people losing their number plates all the time, which is why they basically said to the manufacturer, we're not going to use you any longer. We haven't actually got anyone else to make them, but we're not going to use you any longer.
Well, it's interesting because I had an experience, fairly recently. Motorbike, purchased a brand new motorbike. Of 3, 4 months later, 5 months later, the plates arrived. I fixed them with the supplied bolts, and subsequently lost. And the story that the LTO give is that, oh, you didn't put them on right, you didn't follow the instructions. And
yeah.
That's
2 bolts.
So you heard about this? This seems to be a common problem, I think, with the bolts they attach, yeah?
Yeah, which is why there's no plates available at the moment, apparently.
Mm.
Yeah, you are right about that. They were substandard, and they were actually very paper thin, so they basically rejected all those. Yeah,
but like I said, in kind of true Philippine fashion, they sacked off their supplier without securing a new one first.
Yep.
So yeah, there's no plates available, and there's a backlog of people who need plates, me included.
I'd just like to say, guys, that we're trying to keep this to a time limit, and we've only got about 20 minutes to go. So should we cover the process of buying a vehicle? Maybe we start with motorbikes. Does someone who's had some experience in purchasing a motorbike want to weigh in there, and then I'll talk through buying a car?
Motorbikes?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about buying a motorbike. So I've just bought one, literally, and the process was simple. Probably because I paid cash for it. It wasn't a huge amount of money, but I paid cash for it. It was brand new from a Honda dealer, and there was no issues whatsoever. I went there that morning, paid the money, showed them my license, showed them my proof of billing, etc., which was in my name. Rode home on the bike that afternoon. The company who I bought it from, which was a Honda dealer, they were the ones who actually did the registration and everything in the LTO, so I didn't even have to go and do that. And they called me a few months later, probably 3 months later, I reckon, to say that all my papers were there. And I've now got the papers from the LTO. There's no plate number still, because there's no plates available, but it was a seamless process, and it proves that you can own a vehicle, or at least a motorbike anyway. Damo will talk about cars in a minute for sure. But it proves that you can own a motorbike as a foreigner in the Philippines. I've got a permanent visa, okay, but I'd just like to highlight that when I bought my motorbike, they didn't even ask about my immigration status. They didn't even ask to see an ACR card. They didn't even question that. So that's either an oversight on their behalf, or it's not actually a prerequisite to be a permanent resident to purchase at least a motorbike anyway.
It is.
It's interesting you mention that, because a new law is just being enacted, which is going to, and this is very good information for anyone listening to pick up on, is going to restrict foreigners entering into the country and their ability to apply for a Philippine license. Now, in the past, you could come here, apply for a license, irrespective of your immigration status. But in the future, in order to apply for a new license, to get your license converted, in other words, you have to be a permanent resident. And is
that coming into force, or is that being talked about?
As far as I know. And the relevance of that was that the justification from the LTO behind implementing that law is because foreigners were coming in, getting licenses, purchasing vehicles, and then abandoning the country and leaving the vehicles in, that sounds like an excuse here, but leaving the vehicles status, their legal status in question, and causing them a headache.
Unpaid.
You think that they could just easily reassign ownership. I don't think they'd have a problem doing that.
I've got a very
that
quick
was a
question for you
justification.
on that, Chris, if I could just weigh in. How much do you know about that law and how it applies to people who originally obtained licenses without PR and are now trying to renew them?
You actually covered that. I don't know the details of the law. The article I read about it, which seemed to be very legitimate, and it is one that was posted to the Scams and Warnings group, basically said that it will not be retrospective. Anybody who currently has a license can continue to renew it. That was explicitly
and certainly,
Sarah James, we'll get a link to that Facebook post in the description on the YouTube video for this hangout.
Yeah.
All right, okay. Sorry, carry on, James.
Certainly my experience, having renewed my license literally 2 months ago. Okay, I already had a Filipino driving license, but when I renewed my license this time, again, they didn't ask to see my ACR card, they didn't ask me to show any kind of proof of residency or immigration status at all. So, it's either the little LTO office down here in the darkest province where I live has no idea that that is even a law, or it's because I already had a Filipino license, they just overlooked it.
I suspect don't know which is. I would suspect it's probably the latter.
Yeah, I tend to agree.
I mean, my mother, when we went through that process with her getting that license, they did not check her visa status. She was here on a tourist visa. She was here for 2 months.
Yeah.
All right.
How long ago was that?
Oh God. Just before we bought the house, so we're going back to January last year, give or take.
Yeah, I think this is since then, but somebody's going to look that up.
Well,
I think though the other thing as well is actually we'll check again, like you said, Damon, about putting the link to that video about the license. I remember watching that video about the new license laws and all of that stuff. You need to be a permanent resident, etc., etc. There were several comments on that from people who basically disproved it. So that's worth looking at. Guys who didn't have Filipino licenses, who literally went to the LTO after that video was posted and said, "I've now got a license." So again, it's either.
Goes back to what you said about it. Either could be one or the other, and the other being that they overlooked it.
Yeah, well, that's all. Yeah, and I mean, what I think we should do is one of us, just to anyone watching this on YouTube or who's live now, we'll get a blog post up on the website. It's PhilippinesExpatSupportNetwork.com in the next few days, which will cover some of these questions we're coming up with. And we'll all get together and collaborate on that. And we'll make sure that gets shared through the various groups and pages that you guys have come to as well.
I guess the thing to do, as with a lot of things here in the Philippines, is get the kind of official government stance on the situation, which is this, you have to do this, to get a Filipino license. But in reality, there are people getting them that aren't fulfilling those requirements.
And in reality, I've got to say, James, it depends on which branch of the LTO you go. I tell you what, if you're out in the provinces where I am and where you are, and you go to the local LTO office, you're probably going to meet a lot less friction than you would if you went to Manila or Angeles.
Okay, I'll give you a little I'll just give you a quick anecdote, just give you a little smile, Damon. When I went to get my license renewed 2 months ago, it was in San Jose, which is in Occidental Mindoro, where the island I live on. Okay, very dusty, dark little municipality. Anyway, went into the office.
There's about 6 people on that island, and James is one of them. So
yeah, pretty much. When I went into the office, the girl behind the counter said, "Sir, you need to go and have a medical test." Okay, so I'd done my license previously in Batangas, which involved like a urine sample, etc., an eye test, various things. The one in San Jose, here in the province where we live, consisted of me going into like what I can only describe as a shack, and there was a guy behind the counter who said, "Sir, are you here for a medical test?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said to me, "Okay, what's your name?" So I told him my name. He wrote that down. He said, "What's your blood pressure?" I said, 120. I said 120 over 80. Okay. So he wrote that down as well. And then he said, "Okay, the fee for the medical test is 150, so I gave him 150 pesos and wandered back off to the LTO with my newly issued medical receipt. That's a true story, I swear on my kids' lives.
Absolutely
I
fucking
didn't have to finish my story about getting the fine in the other city. So to finish that off, subsequently I let that license lapse. It was, as you know, in my wrong spelling of my name. And then some time later, a number of months, I was in another area, and I had some pretty good contacts in that area. So I went into the LTO office, and well, I actually knew the chief there and the 2IC, and I was ushered into the office, and much better experience. I sat having coffee in the aircon office while they chased around did it all, but okay.
It's all about who you know, Chris.
I was concerned whether they might pick up the other license in the wrong spelling. I said, no, probably they won't, because it was the wrong spelling of the surname. But if they did...
let me guess, they missed it in or a T.
I might say, well, you can't get a new license because you've got this outstanding license and fine over here. And I was just hoping that wouldn't happen. And sure enough, it didn't. And I actually walked out with my new license in about an hour, plastic in hand.
Yeah.
Well, should I jump in and just talk about my car purchasing experience and talk about a quick... A quick story. Now, I mean, I was in a town to the north of where I am now, and I'm not going to name names to protect the guilty. And we've been looking for a car for about 4 weeks, and we finally found this thing. The first car that we found was this lovely little Honda. It was about 300 grand, and all I wanted was a little sedan, and that was fine. And then we were on our way to the LTO to do the transfer when the guy turned around and said, it's not actually my car, but I've got an open deed of sale. And I just want to highlight this to...
Which is very common here.
Yep, it's very common, but it's also something that people need to pay attention to. If they've got an open deed of sale, what they've got is they've got possibly the permission of the owner of the vehicle. At best, they've got a photocopy of the owner of the vehicle's ID, and possibly a forged signature on the deed of sale. And the way that they work is it's pre-filled, you get the car, then your details go in, and it's pre-notarized. Now,
that's right.
As James said, I mean, it's a very common way to sell a vehicle here, and in 90% of cases, it probably goes okay. But it's not something that I'd ever recommend. I had a lawyer at the time, and we were on our way to the LTO. When I got told this, I then called my lawyer, and I said, look, what would you say to this? And he said, tell them to pull over, you get out of the vehicle now, you get in a taxi, and you go back to the house, and you find another car. Because you have no legal protection if you're signing a pre-notarized document. So that's the first thing I want to say, and that put us off probably 2 or 3 different vehicle purchases. Then I finally got introduced to an Aussie guy, who, nice bloke, lovely bloke, you know, and he had this Mitsubishi Lancer parked outside of his house, and it was a nice car. It went like, in the Australian vernacular, an absolute shower of shit. It was quick as living hell, and it was very comfortable, and it had a little DVD player in it and all the rest of it. And he said, yeah, sound as a pound, it's all good. Don't trust the vendor just because he's an expat. And I'm going to say that from fucking experience, because what I did even after nearly 30 years in Asia was I bought a lemon off a white man because he was white. All right? And I'd just like to say that is not... Right? I see you nodding there, Chris. Would you agree with that statement?
Yep, definitely. They're there, and they become more feral the longer they stay there in general. Mind you, I think I was 10 years a few months ago, and yeah, I think I've retained some... what word should I use?
Perhaps would be appropriate.
Okay.
some semblance of decorum. Shall we phrase it like that? Or?
That might work. I just dare not use the first words that I was going to use.
But anyway, I bought this car. It lasted us. It only lasted about 6 months before it completely shat itself, and it ended up. I mean, the thing is, it was my fault. I'd been out here for a couple of years. I was getting the shits with the fact that we were having trouble buying a car. I sat down with a guy, spilled my guts over a beer, and I said, "Look, mate, I'm so sick of people offering me cars that have been underwater, people hitting me with fucking open deeds of sale. There's all these problems with these vehicles." And then he piped up and he said, "Oh, you can have my Lancer. It's never been underwater." And I bought it. And we were lucky. I bought it for $230, and I managed to sell it for $170, and we drove it for a good 6 months in the middle. So it wasn't really the end of the world. I didn't lose that much on it. But I just say to everybody, 2 points: don't buy a car of a white man just because he's white. And if anyone offers you an open deed of sale, just turn around, walk away, and find another vehicle.
Okay. I've got an interesting observation to make about driving in the Philippines, which is what the title of this this show has been, and we've hardly actually broached on the actual subject of driving here, and we've all got lots of stories about that for sure. But it was an interesting thing I noticed, because when I first purchased my vehicle, it had a normal clear window, and what I noticed is, as a foreigner, you're an unknown quantity. You do weird things. They're not sure what you're going to do. You won't necessarily. You're not that smart. You mightn't do what the Filipinos are expecting you to do on the road. So you actually end up giving a little bit of allowance, and it's amazing what you can get away with. But then I got my windows with that F-out tint. You know, that really dark tint where you just couldn't see in if you go up to the glass like that, and it was pretty dark on the front too, and no, they couldn't see in. So when I had that tint on the car, there's another whole dimension that I really started to understand, and that is you get it with the people crossing the road, and the way they put their arm up and refuse to look at you. But they've checked, they've looked. They know you can see them, and they know that you're going to have to stop. So there's this whole game going on, and it's between vehicles, it's between pedestrians, and if you're in a car with a really tinted windscreen, you're not playing that game, so you're unseen. So you've got other advantages too, because they won't do this to you, for example, and other cars will sort of hold back. Did he see me? I'm not absolutely sure he saw me. So there's that whole dimension too. So there's two little quickies for you. I'm sure people can comment.
All right. Well, we've now. I'll just say we've now got 11 minutes left to go. So I'd suggest we aim for closing arguments so we can keep these things to the right length. So I'll be back in about 30 seconds. Why doesn't either James or Tim weigh in on that?
I think, Tim, you go ahead, Tim. You've been rather quiet.
Well, I've had no video, so it kind of, I'm in silence. But I've had some very interesting. I've had a couple of motorcycle accidents. I've had to deal with LTO police. One time I was rear-ended by a motorcycle racing without a headlight behind me. It was because I made a move. Due to it was actually in the dark. I saw in my left-hand mirror that a headlight was bouncing on this very rough road, and I knew he was coming at a very, very rapid rate of speed, and I didn't realize it, so I slid to the right just slightly, and when I did, there was another one racing alongside him, no headlight. That was a complete sham. The motorcycles were all illegal. Everybody was drunk everybody was drunk, and when the police came, they ran, and someone else helped them deep fix their motorcycles, and I was standing there by myself with two people with blood coming out of their ears and everything else. But anyway, really, when it comes down to it, I've never had many problems. I've traveled Mindanao very heavily in a motorcycle. I've been in NPA territory. I've been in many different dangerous situations. I think for the time that I've been on the road, I actually over the 10 years I've been there, I hit a jeepney one time because he made a wrong. The police officer told me to go, and unfortunately the light was actually just came on at the same second, and I hit him. But in those situations, I think negotiations are very normal. When the guy jumped out and saw I was white after I took my helmet off, he demanded 20,000 pesos for a hole in his door the size of a silver dollar. By the time it was over, I handed him 300 pesos and I was on my way. But it took him an hour and a half. But I think in any of those situations, I think if you stay calm, don't get out of hand, and just try to figure out the best way to get past some of those situations. Was it fair? Was it fair for me to pay 300 pesos that day? Probably not, but after an hour and a half, that was a bargain.
I'd just like to say, you make a really good and important point that I think is really essential for everyone to understand. Never pick a fight on the side of the road if you have an accident. Just don't, because it's going to fucking end very badly for you if you get your neck up. Yeah.
My motorcycle accident was a good example of that, because when the one kid is laying on the floor, on the ground alongside the road, there's blood coming out of his ear, and his friend is on top of him going, "Johnny, Johnny." And when he realized I was behind him, because I'm looking down at him, he goes, "You killed my..." He said a lot more than that, but he says, "You killed my friend," and he came after me.
Yeah.
And I just backed up as fast as I could. I probably did the moonwalk faster than anybody in the world, but and I got away from him just in time, and then someone else stepped between us.
I've got to say, in that situation, if you'd swung a punch, you probably would have ended up dead.
Well, there was 40-some people standing there, and that would have been the end of me. Somebody would have knifed me or killed me right there.
I mean, would all four of us agree with that statement, that that's kind of how it would have gone?
Yep.
Yeah.
It could have gone that way.
Yep. So the big thing I'd say is that to me, I refuse to drive here, as you guys, as I've said. I hired a driver who ended up ripping me off, and I got fucked on that particular car, but it was all a lesson, and it didn't cost me that much money. But the reality is that even if my driver had been involved in an accident, I would have just sat in the back. Let them work it out themselves, and then put your foot down. We've just lost James, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. I guess he's swapping Sims, but would you two agree with that? You're just better off, if you're in a position where you don't have to get involved, just fucking don't.
Don't do it.
That's the operative word, because they will want to involve you.
Yeah.
They will try everything, even when the police come, even if they haven't involved you, they will try to involve you.
Yeah. Very common.
Yeah. So you're better off, and I mean.
Trying not to be involved, absolutely. Great.
And there's a story I'll tell about what happened in a bar one night that resulted in me nearly losing my big toe. But that's going to be a completely different fucking topic.
That's another podcast.
That is another podcast, guys. We've got 6 minutes left, so let's look at wrapping this thing up at 9 on the dot. James, you're in charge tonight. Do you want to give a bit of a monologue to wrap things up?
Yeah, I mean, for me, as a foreigner driving here, I think my only piece of advice would be expect the unexpected at all times. And that is literally, like I've mentioned earlier, you need eyes in the back of your head. There's people with no lights, there's people with no horns, there's people with no brains, there's people with no licenses, and it's an absolute liability sometimes, and especially on a motorbike. I mean, that's my main form of transport every day, motorbike. You are vulnerable. You are very vulnerable. When you've got trucks and jeeps, even tricycles, you're the smallest thing on the road. And like you said earlier, that makes a big deal. When you've got two vehicles coming down the middle of the road, the biggest one always wins. The smaller one either goes into the ditch or you have an accident, and that's not something I really want to do. So yeah, it would be expect the unexpected at all times. At all times. Think of every possible scenario that the other driver could potentially do, and expect it. Literally expect it.
Because I mean,
the other thing. Sorry.
To be offensive on the road here than it is to be defensive.
Well, I've spoken to many expats, okay, and a lot of them say they drive defensively. I personally drive offensively. I feel it gives me a slight advantage. But the other thing I was just going to say quickly before we wrap this up, before you guys have your say, is the other thing about the Philippines is you have got hazards that you do not have in Western countries. There are fucking dogs and chickens and goats and you name it everywhere.
And motorbikes, and even if you're on the main highway, you've got kids standing on the fucking centre line, and you just got to be so careful. All right, well, guys, we've got 3 minutes. What I'd like to do is offer Chris a minute and Tim a minute. Chris, do you want to give us 60 seconds just to wrap this up?
Okay, driving in the Philippines. I would categorize, I think it's polarized actually, between two types of drivers, a very timid, passive driver and a very aggressive driver. The aggressive drivers are in the majority by far. Now, it goes back to what you're just saying about whether you're defensive or offensive. Well, passive, aggressive, I'm talking about far more polarized than being defensive or offensive, because the Philippines is not for those who are timid, especially with regard to driving. So,
yeah, I agree.
In fact, I think that's generally yeah.
I'm done. I don't know. Somebody else have my time. Go.
All right, Tim, it's your turn to bring us home.
And here's what I always say to people when they decide that they want to drive. And because motorcycles have always been in my life, and I do suggest it to people, but unfortunately in the Philippines, we have a second name for them, and they're called donor cycles, meaning you may donate your foot, your leg, your life, your arm. You don't know what you're going to donate because of accidents and other problems. But the biggest issue in the Philippines is we're dealing in roadways that are not maintained, constantly washed out in tropical storms, that create hazards, like James said, that just never are ending. And the problem is in the United States here, we lean into a curve. You don't lean into a curve in the Philippines. You better know what's on that curve. And what was there 15 minutes ago doesn't mean when you come back around that curve, it's gonna be as clear as it was 15 minutes ago. That's true in any situation. But the problem here is there's stones. They have unusual ways of building roadways where there's steep inclines right next to major highways that collapse, creating road hazards that are never ending. And I think that's why most people buy a small SUV and hire a driver, because the responsibility is huge. And I think that's
why I did it, Tim. That's why I did it.
Yep, it makes 100%. There's really no reason, especially if you're up there in age a little bit and you have eyesight issues or reaction issues, the best thing you can do is buy an SUV or a small car and hire a driver, because that 3,000 to 5,000 peso expense will save you endless heartache.
Can I just finish off with a quick anecdote before we go?
Absolutely.
Just from what you said then, Tim, about eyesight issues, a friend of mine, another expat, Canadian guy, really nice guy, he went to get his license at the LTO, and he wears contact lenses, okay? He's a dive master. He wears contact lenses, though. And he had to do the eyesight test. So the girl said to him, "Sir, can you look at that board over there and read off that board?" Okay? So he looked at the board, and he said to the girl, "I can't quite see it. Can I move closer?" And she said, "Yeah, sure." So he moved to within about a foot of the board, read it out aloud, and the girl said, "Okay, so that's fine." That's a true story.
Seriously, that really does.
That was the best one yet.
It's a true story. It's a true story.
I love it.
Let's finish it up. If I can throw a few closing words in. To anyone who's watching this on YouTube or who's joined us for the podcast, thanks very much. And if you want to keep up on our weekly Google Hangouts, hit our website, PhilippinesExpatSupportNetwork.com. Up in there are some blog posts, there are some links to some Facebook groups. We'd love to get you involved, love to help you out. So check that website out, and we'll see you here again at 8 p.m. Philippine time next Sunday night, which I think, if I look at my calendar and I can still do math, is about the 19th. And good. Thank you to everyone who was involved.
Cheers, guys.
Yes, thank you.
Good evening.
Okay, we will post about this on the Facebook group, page, and thank you. Bye. I'll stop the broadcast.